The moment Pavel leaned back in his chair, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the way he smiled at Amelia, my daughter, or how his hand rested a little too casually over hers. No, it was the way his eyes slid toward me, dark, calculating, dismissive. The kind of look that said, "You don't matter. You're in my way." He leaned toward his friend, whispered something in Russian, and then laughed. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It was sharp, cruel, and pointed. His friend joined in, their eyes darting toward me as if I were the joke, the fool at my own table. I sat there quiet, my face calm, but inside my chest my heart hammered, because I understood every single word Pavel said. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel Mine Sweet Revenge, and tell me in the comments if you've ever been underestimated or mocked. Because what you're about to hear is a story of humiliation, betrayal, and justice. The kind that tastes sweetest when it comes from patience and silence. Amelia didn't notice. My beautiful girl, glowing with happiness, laughed at something else Pavel had said in English, her hand tightening around his as if he were her whole world. She didn't see his mockery. She didn't hear the venom in his Russian words. She didn't realize that while she was caught up in love, he was using her moment of joy to belittle the man who had raised her, the man who had given everything so she could have a future. The rest of the table carried on as if nothing was happening. Glasses clinked, plates shifted, conversations swirled. But all I could hear was Pavel's voice in Russian, calling me starik glupy, a stupid old man. It hit me like a slap. He thought I didn't understand. He thought he could humiliate me in front of Amelia, in front of everyone, and I would just smile and nod, none the wiser. He thought Russian was his shield, a secret language he could hide behind. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had lived in Moscow for years, back when Amelia was still a little girl. I'd built business relationships, friendships, and survival itself on that language. I hadn't spoken it much since coming home, hadn't flaunted it, hadn't even told Amelia how fluent I truly was. To her I was just Dad. To Pavel I was just an obstacle, an old man too simple to understand. I let the moment linger. I forced a smile when Amelia turned her bright eyes toward me, asking if I was enjoying the evening. I nodded even though my stomach burned. My hands clenched under the table, but I didn't let it show. If there's one thing life has taught me, it's that silence can be sharper than any blade. Pavel continued, emboldened, as if my quietness confirmed his superiority. He leaned back, gesturing toward me again, his Russian words dripping with contempt. "Look at him," he said to his friend. "A nobody. Amelia deserves better. He has nothing to offer but stories of the past." My jaw tightened, but I didn't move. I let him think he was winning. I let him think I was ignorant. Amelia, still oblivious, excused herself to speak with a friend across the room. The moment she walked away, Pavel's smirk widened. He looked straight at me then, and in Russian he added, "Soon he'll be nothing, just a shadow. She won't even need him anymore." And that was when I made my decision. I didn't respond, not yet. I simply met his eyes and gave him the faintest of smiles, a smile that must have puzzled him, because for a brief second I saw hesitation flicker across his face. That was my card. That was the secret I was holding close to my chest. He thought I was defeated, humiliated, powerless, but what he didn't know was that I had every intention of answering him, in Russian, loud and clear when the moment was right, and when I did, the look on his face would be worth every ounce of silence I endured that night. The next morning, Walter sat at the kitchen table staring at his untouched coffee, the steam already fading into the air. His eyes were hollow from lack of sleep, his thoughts looping back to the night before. Pavel's smug smile, his careless Russian insults, the way he paraded Amelia around like she was his possession rather than his partner. It all gnawed at Walter like a poison he couldn't shake. The silence of the house pressed down on him. This home, once filled with laughter when Amelia was a child, now felt cold and heavy, a stage where deceit was being carefully rehearsed. He remembered the little girl who used to climb into his lap, asking him to read the same bedtime story over and over. She had trusted him with her whole world back then. Now, her trust was in a man who had mocked Walter openly in a language he thought no one else understood. Amelia's light footsteps broke the quiet. She entered the kitchen humming, her face glowing with the kind of joy only young love could create. She kissed Walter's cheek casually, not noticing the stiffness in his posture. "Morning, Dad," she said, her voice airy and warm. "Pavel's picking me up later. We're going to tour some venues. The word struck Walter like a hammer. She wasn't just dating this man. She was planning to marry him, to tie her future to a man who had called her too trusting behind her back. Walter's throat tightened, but he forced a weak smile. "Sounds good," he murmured, taking a sip of the bitter coffee he didn't even taste. Amelia rattled on about flowers and music, oblivious to the storm in her father's chest. To her, Pavel was perfect, a man who made her laugh, who knew how to charm her with small gestures and sweet words. She didn't hear the venom in his private conversations, the truth hiding behind the curtain of his smile. Later that evening, Walter found himself sitting across from them at dinner. Amelia laughed brightly at Pavel's jokes, her hand resting comfortably on his arm. Pavel played his role flawlessly, nodding politely at Walter, showering Amelia with just enough affection to keep her enchanted. But whenever Amelia's eyes turned away, Pavel's expression shifted. A flash of arrogance, a smirk dripping with disdain, and then the Russian word slipped out again. Low enough for Amelia to miss, sharp enough for Walter to catch, bespolezny, useless. Walter's jaw tightened as he carved into his steak, every muscle in his body demanding he lash out. But he didn't. He chewed slowly, forcing his breathing to remain steady. Silence, he knew, was more powerful than anger. His silence was bait, and Pavel, arrogant as ever, was taking it. The fiancé leaned slightly toward a friend who had joined them at the table, muttering another string of Russian. This time Walter caught far more than an insult. Pavel spoke of Amelia as naive, someone who would never suspect his motives. He hinted at money, at securing a future for himself through this marriage. Walter's chest burned with rage, but more than that, it broke. His daughter's love was real, pure, and blinding. She was giving her heart away to a man who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone. He looked at Amelia across the table, her smile radiant, her laughter free. She had no idea, and if Walter exploded now, if he accused Pavel without proof, Amelia would take Pavel's side. Love was a stubborn shield, and right now it protected the very man who was plotting against her. So Walter swallowed the anger. He let Pavel think he was safe. He let him speak freely, carelessly, believing his foreign tongue kept his secrets hidden. But Walter was listening. Walter was collecting every word, every insult, every plan that Pavel foolishly voiced. Patience, Walter reminded himself. The time would come. The mask would crack. And when it did, Walter would be ready, not with anger, but with the truth Pavel thought no one else could understand. As Amelia leaned into Pavel's side, glowing with blind happiness, Walter made a silent vow. This man would not ruin her life. He would expose him, but not yet, not in anger, not without evidence. No, when the moment arrived, Walter would strike back in Pavel's own language. And when he did, the wolf would finally be seen for what he was. The following days were a tense dance, a careful balancing act. Walter kept his calm, even as Pavel's arrogance became more blatant with each encounter. Every time Amelia brought him to the house, every dinner or casual visit, Walter noticed the subtle ways Pavel tried to assert dominance. The leaning over, the whispered words in Russian, the little smirks when Amelia's attention wandered elsewhere. Walter recorded every nuance in his mind, cataloguing it as evidence. Not for anyone else, not yet, but for the moment when the truth would finally surface. Walter had always been a patient man. Life had taught him that impulsive actions often backfire, and in this case, patience was a weapon more potent than anger. He watched Pavel, studied him. Every laugh in Russian, every sleight of hand meant something. Walter was learning to anticipate the man's moves, like a chess master reading an opponent several steps ahead. Amelia, in her blissful ignorance, continued planning the wedding. She spoke endlessly about flowers, dresses, and the seating arrangement for her guests. Walter listened, nodding politely, but inside he felt a growing urgency. The more she invested in Pavel, the higher the stakes became. And yet, he didn't want to alarm her unnecessarily. This had to be done carefully, strategically. One afternoon, Walter found himself alone in the study, flipping through old letters and documents. He had always kept a record of his travels, his dealings abroad, the time he had spent in Moscow years ago, perfecting his Russian. It was ironic that what he once considered just a practical skill would now become the key to defending his daughter's honor. His knowledge of the language had always been hidden, a quiet weapon tucked away for emergencies. Now it felt like destiny. Walter knew Pavel believed his linguistic advantage gave him power. That belief had made the fiancé reckless, bold, and overconfident. Every insult, every joke, every whispered comment in Russian was an arrow in his quiver. But Walter was a silent archer, drawing back his bowstring patiently, waiting for the perfect release. The house felt heavier each day, filled with the tension of unspoken truths. Walter observed every interaction, noting the way Pavel spoke to Amelia, the way he subtly tried to undermine Walter without making it obvious. He catalogued every slight, every insinuation about money, every attempt to assert control over Amelia's decisions. Each observation became another piece of his plan, another layer of evidence to support the truth he would reveal. At night, Walter would sit alone in the living room, replaying the events in his mind. The words Pavel had spoken, the mockery, the arrogance, it all fueled a quiet rage. But it was not the kind of rage that demanded immediate action. It was the steady, simmering kind that waited for the exact right moment to explode. He thought about Amelia constantly. How innocent she was, how she trusted this man blindly. Walter knew that confronting Pavel too soon might only drive a wedge between father and daughter. She needed to see the truth in a way that left no room for doubt, and that required patience. Then there were the small signs. Pavel's arrogance sometimes slipped, a smirk too long held, a joke that landed wrong, or a glance that revealed impatience. Walter noted these cracks. They were opportunities to expose the man who dared humiliate him, to ensure Amelia could see Pavel for who he truly was. Walter also reached out discreetly to an old friend fluent in Russian, confirming nuances and idioms that Pavel had used. It was subtle preparation, ensuring that when the time came to respond, he could speak with precision, with authority, and leave no doubt in anyone's mind about what had been said and what it truly meant. Through it all, Walter maintained a calm exterior, a mask that concealed the storm brewing inside. Amelia continued to gush about the wedding plans, unaware of the underlying tension. Pavel continued to underestimate Walter, blind to his arrogance. And Walter, steady and resolute, prepared to turn the tables in a way that would shock both his daughter and the man who thought himself clever. The foundation for what was coming had been laid. Every insult Pavel had thrown in Russian, every attempt to diminish Walter's presence, every smirk and whispered comment had been quietly stored, ready to be revealed. Walter's patience was not weakness, it was strategy. And soon the moment would arrive when Pavel's arrogance would meet its match. The weekend came, and with it another visit from Pavel and Amelia. Walter had spent the morning in quiet preparation, reviewing the moments from the previous days. Every smirk, every careless word Pavel had spoken in Russian. The man's arrogance was growing bolder with each passing encounter, and Walter knew that eventually pride would be his undoing. Amelia was radiant, her excitement contagious as she described the wedding ideas she had collected online. She spoke of venues, decorations, and seating arrangements, completely oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Pavel, sitting beside her, smiled and nodded in all the right places, making occasional asides in Russian to his friend across the room. Walter observed quietly, his expression calm, almost serene, but his mind was sharp and alert. Every word Pavel spoke in Russian, every glance, every gesture, was catalogued and filed in Walter's memory. The man was so careless, so sure of his superiority, that he left an open trail of arrogance and disdain. Walter knew he had to exploit it, but timing was everything. Amelia laughed at a comment Pavel made in English, leaning into him without a care in the world. Walter's chest tightened, a mixture of pride and worry. She had grown into a confident, loving young woman, unaware that the man she adored had been undermining her father's presence, mocking him in words she couldn't understand. Pavel spoke again in Russian, low and pointed. "Starik ничего не понимает," he whispered. "The old man understands nothing." Walter's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He didn't flinch, didn't respond. He simply took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the silence speak louder than words. This calm, measured silence had become his armor, a subtle signal that he was listening, observing, and waiting. The tension in the room grew unnoticed by Amelia, but Pavel felt it. Walter's quiet strength made him uneasy, though he refused to show it. He continued his small acts of dominance, leaning closer to Amelia, speaking over Walter, whispering insults in Russian as though he were untouchable. But cracks were beginning to show, small ones. A pause too long after his own joke, a faltering smirk when he noticed Walter's composed stare, a subtle hesitation when he realized Walter hadn't flinched at anything he said. Walter's patience was deliberate. He knew that a confrontation too early could backfire. Amelia might side with Pavel, interpreting Walter's anger as jealousy or bitterness. No, the revelation had to be precise, calculated, and undeniable. He had to make sure Pavel's arrogance would lead to his own exposure. He recalled every insult Pavel had thrown in Russian over the past week. Each one was a building block in his plan, a piece of the puzzle that would eventually reveal the fiancé's true character. Walter had even started practicing his own Russian responses quietly, perfecting the phrasing that would shock everyone, especially Pavel, when the time came. As the evening went on, Walter noticed subtle changes in Pavel's behavior. The confidence, the bravado, that mask of untouchable superiority, it was faltering, even if slightly. Walter's calm, unshakable presence had unnerved him, and the more Pavel tried to regain control, the more he revealed himself. Amelia, oblivious to the tension, continued to chat, her excitement filling the room. Walter smiled faintly at her, masking the storm inside him. He loved her fiercely, and his silence was a shield, protecting her from the truth until he could reveal it safely. Walter's mind raced through possibilities. How would he respond? What words would pierce the arrogance without hurting Amelia? How could he undeniably expose Pavel, leaving no room for misinterpretation? He realized the answer was simple. Let Pavel speak freely, let him continue his arrogance, and then strike with the clarity of truth. Pavel's own words would betray him, amplified by Walter's knowledge of the language, his years of experience, and his careful observation. The night ended with Pavel and Amelia leaving, the tension lingering like a shadow over the house. Walter remained at the table alone, reviewing every detail in his mind. He had patience, strategy, and knowledge. He had Amelia's trust and the upper hand, though Pavel didn't know it yet. And deep down, Walter knew the moment of confrontation was approaching. Pavel's arrogance would lead him straight into a trap of his own making. The storm was coming, and Walter would be ready. The following week, the tension in the house became almost palpable. Walter moved through his days with quiet precision, every step deliberate, every glance calculated. He wasn't just a father watching his daughter. He was a strategist, preparing for a confrontation that would expose Pavel's arrogance for all to see. Amelia remained blissfully unaware of the undercurrent running through their home. She continued to gush about wedding plans, sharing screenshots of venues and floral arrangements, her eyes lighting up at every idea. Walter watched her carefully, masking his worry behind a calm, reassuring smile. He had to maintain this composure. Any sign of impatience or anger could tip Pavel off or make Amelia question his intentions. Pavel, for his part, had grown increasingly confident. He strutted around as if he owned the house, whispering to friends in Russian and laughing at his own jokes. Each whispered insult, each snide remark, was a thread Walter added to his growing tapestry of evidence. He didn't interrupt, didn't respond immediately. He let Pavel weave his arrogance, knowing that the man's pride would be his downfall. Walter began small tests, subtle maneuvers to gauge Pavel's reactions. At dinner, he asked Amelia to translate a casual Russian phrase he had picked up, watching carefully as Pavel stiffened. At another moment, he mentioned a Russian proverb, watching Pavel's smirk falter ever so slightly. Each observation was a small victory, proof that Pavel's confidence wasn't as unshakable as he believed. Meanwhile, Walter quietly documented every instance of Pavel's contempt. Every sarcastic comment, every insult spoken in a language Amelia didn't understand. This wasn't just for Walter's own satisfaction, it was evidence. When the time came, there would be no ambiguity, no room for excuses. Pavel's own arrogance would betray him. Even in seemingly mundane moments, Walter remained vigilant. When Amelia and Pavel left to visit a florist, he lingered behind, observing the way Pavel's eyes wandered over the house, as if cataloguing it for some unseen purpose. It was small, subtle, but telling. Walter's instincts, honed by years of experience and observation, told him that this man's intentions were far from honorable. That evening, Walter sat in the study, quietly rehearsing the confrontation in his mind. He imagined the moment when he would respond in Russian, carefully phrasing each word to cut through Pavel's arrogance. He envisioned Amelia's reaction, the shock, the realization, the betrayal, and he felt a surge of determination. This wasn't about vengeance for himself. It was about protecting his daughter from a man who thought he could manipulate and humiliate her family with impunity. Walter also began preparing visual evidence, subtle cues, recordings of conversations, even small gestures captured in photos, all pieced together to create an irrefutable case against Pavel's duplicity. He knew that Amelia's trust in him and her love for Pavel meant the confrontation needed to be undeniable. Pavel's arrogance had to be exposed in a way that Amelia could understand fully, without doubt. Days passed with the tension simmering, each moment of silence heavy with anticipation. Walter continued to interact with Pavel politely, carefully, masking the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. He asked innocent questions, made casual observations, and all the while he monitored Pavel's reactions. Every flicker of hesitation, every misstep was a sign that the time was approaching. Walter's patience was not passive. It was an active, deliberate preparation. He knew that when Pavel thought he had the upper hand completely, that's when Walter would strike. He would turn Pavel's own arrogance against him, revealing the truth in a single, powerful moment that would leave no room for doubt. By the end of the week, Walter felt ready. He had gathered enough evidence, observed enough cracks in Pavel's facade, and rehearsed enough responses to feel confident that the confrontation would succeed. The storm was near, and when it broke it would do so with undeniable clarity, leaving Pavel exposed and Amelia's trust in her father reaffirmed. Walter went to bed that night with a sense of calm determination. The battle had been quiet, subtle, strategic, And soon the moment would come when Pavel's arrogance would finally meet its match. The evening arrived with a quiet tension that settled over the house like a thick fog. Walter had prepared carefully. Every step of the day had built toward this moment. Amelia was in the living room, arranging wedding invitations with a cheerful focus that made Walter's chest tighten. She was blissfully unaware of the storm about to break. Pavel entered, his usual smirk firmly in place. He didn't notice Walter's steady gaze, the calm determination that made the air in the room feel different. This time, Pavel's arrogance seemed slightly off balance, though he refused to show it. He had grown so comfortable mocking Walter in Russian that he believed the man would never respond. As the evening progressed, Pavel leaned toward Amelia, whispering words in Russian with that same smug confidence. Walter could feel his blood boil, but he kept his composure. He let Pavel speak freely, each insult now another thread in the net Walter had woven carefully over the past week. Finally, Walter set down his cup of tea and took a deep breath. He waited until Pavel leaned close again, his voice low, confident, and dripping with disdain. The words were clear, deliberate, every syllable designed to humiliate, to assert dominance. Walter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he fixed Pavel with a calm, steady gaze. Then in perfect Russian, Walter spoke, his tone quiet but filled with controlled authority. «Ты думаешь, что я ничего не понимаю, но я понимаю все», he said. «You think I understand nothing, but I understand everything». Pavel froze mid-gesture, his smirk faltering. The room seemed to hold its breath. Amelia, confused, looked up from her invitations. Her eyes darted between her father and her fiancé, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Walter continued, his voice steady, unwavering. Every insult Pavel had ever whispered in Russian was now reflected at him, perfectly translated and addressed with precision. «Ты думаешь, что можешь нас обмануть, но я вижу твою гордыню и обман», he said. «You think you can deceive us, but I see your arrogance and deceit». Pavel's face went pale. The confident, untouchable mask he had worn for so long cracked under the weight of Walter's words. Every syllable was a hammer, every carefully chosen phrase a spotlight revealing the man he truly was. Amelia's mouth fell open. Her eyes widened, the color draining slightly from her face as realization dawned. She had never heard her father speak Russian, never imagined he could understand. And now the truth hit her like a wave. Everything Pavel had said behind her back had been heard, understood, catalogued, and now exposed. Walter didn't yell. He didn't need to. His calm, unwavering tone carried all the force required. The weight of his composure, combined with the undeniable truth of Pavel's arrogance, struck harder than any outburst ever could. Pavel stumbled over words, trying to recover, but Walter didn't give him the opportunity. Every lie, every insult, every attempt to assert dominance crumbled under the quiet power of Walter's revelation. The man who thought himself clever was now laid bare, his deceit visible to Amelia and anyone else present. Amelia, finally understanding, stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. The trust she had placed in Pavel wavered, shaken to its very core. Her eyes, previously filled with adoration, now sought the truth in her father's calm, confident expression. And there it was. Walter, quiet but resolute, had protected her honor without a single harsh word or raised voice. Pavel, on the other hand, was flustered, embarrassed, and trapped by his own arrogance. The room was silent, the tension nearly unbearable, until Amelia finally found her voice. She looked at her father, then at Pavel, and for the first time questioned the man she had so blindly trusted. Walter, sensing the moment had arrived, maintained his composure. His plan had worked perfectly. Pavel's own words had betrayed him, his arrogance had led him straight into exposure, and now the truth was undeniable. The silent, patient father had won without a single argument, without drama, simply through intelligence, preparation, and unshakable calm. The confrontation had ended, though its impact lingered. Pavel's smugness was gone, replaced with a mixture of shame and disbelief. Amelia's trust shifted, realigned back to her father, who had quietly protected her all along. Walter's patience, his careful observation, and his strategic approach had created a turning point, one that would change the course of their family dynamic forever. And as the evening drew to a close, Walter felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The storm had arrived. It had struck with precision, and the first cracks in Pavel's facade were undeniable. The next steps would solidify the truth completely. But for now, Walter allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. The following morning, the house felt charged with a new energy. Walter moved through the kitchen quietly, pouring coffee, his mind replaying the confrontation from the previous evening. Pavel's arrogance had been laid bare, his pride fractured, yet Walter knew the work was not fully complete. Amelia needed clarity, confirmation that the man she trusted could no longer deceive her. Amelia appeared at the kitchen doorway, her hair still slightly messy from sleep, her expression conflicted. She avoided eye contact with Pavel, who had lingered in the living room, attempting to act casual, despite the tension clinging to him like a second skin. She seemed smaller somehow, as if the realization of her father's words and the truth behind Pavel's mockery had pulled the air from her lungs. Walter approached her gently. "Coffee?" he asked, his tone calm, warm and steady. She nodded, her lips trembling slightly. He handed her the cup, his eyes meeting hers with quiet reassurance. Amelia took a sip, her gaze flicking toward Pavel, who tried to maintain his composure but failed. The smirk that once made him feel untouchable was gone, replaced with a faint, uneasy grimace. Walter decided it was time to reinforce the truth. He spoke softly in Russian, just enough for Amelia to hear the tone and understand the translation in her mind. "He has been hiding behind words, thinking we wouldn't understand. But every word has been heard, and every intention is clear." Amelia's eyes widened as the pieces fell together. Her admiration for Pavel shifted to confusion, then disbelief. The man she had trusted to love and honor her had spent weeks insulting her father, mocking him behind her back and thinking no one would notice. Walter's quiet authority, his knowledge and his restraint had revealed the truth without a single dramatic outburst, and the impact was profound. Pavel, sensing the shift, attempted to recover. He tried to explain, to soften the moments he had spent in arrogance, but every word stumbled against the undeniable weight of Walter's evidence. His gestures, his whispers, his smug jokes, they now seemed foolish, childish even, as the truth settled into the minds of those present. Walter remained calm, letting the silence speak for him. Each pause, each steady glance, each unspoken confirmation reinforced the reality that Pavel had underestimated both him and the strength of his knowledge. Amelia looked at her father, the clarity of her understanding evident in her eyes. She no longer questioned his authority. She trusted his judgment implicitly. Pavel's attempts to regain control only made his position weaker. He had relied on secrecy, arrogance, and perceived superiority, but Walter had dismantled all three. Each insult that had once been a weapon for him was now a liability, evidence of his own deception. The man who had believed himself untouchable now faced the reality that his facade had crumbled. Amelia finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Dad, I had no idea." Her words trailed off as she looked at Pavel, her expression shifting from confusion to disappointment. "How could you?" The question hung in the air, a damning echo of disbelief. Walter stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Amelia, the truth is clear now. You deserve honesty, and he's shown who he really is. Let's not let arrogance and deceit cloud what matters most." His calm, measured words carried authority, wisdom, and an unshakable moral center. Amelia nodded slowly. Her trust in her father was strengthened. Pavel's posture slumped. His attempts to charm, explain, or justify had all failed. Walter's knowledge of Russian, combined with his patience and strategic observation, had created an unassailable wall of truth that Pavel could not scale. Every plan he had made to humiliate and manipulate had backfired spectacularly. The day continued with tension still thick, but Walter maintained control. He guided Amelia gently, answering her questions and reinforcing the reality of Pavel's duplicity. Pavel, meanwhile, remained isolated, his arrogance replaced with quiet shame. Realizing that his deceit had been exposed to those who mattered most, Walter reflected on the events with a sense of quiet triumph. The confrontation had been deliberate, precise, and effective. He had protected Amelia without resorting to anger, had exposed the truth without theatrics, and had demonstrated the power of patience, observation, and strategic intelligence. By evening, the dynamic in the house had shifted completely. Amelia's trust in her father was stronger than ever. Pavel's arrogance had been dismantled, leaving him humbled and exposed. Walter, calm and resolute, had orchestrated the moment flawlessly, ensuring justice had been served without unnecessary drama. The first major battle was won, but Walter knew the next steps would solidify the truth entirely, leaving no room for doubt and ensuring that his daughter could move forward with clarity and confidence. The storm had broken, but its final repercussions were yet to be fully realized. The following weekend brought a family gathering at Walter's home. Walter had insisted that Amelia invite both sets of extended family, creating an environment where every action would be observed, every word scrutinized. He knew Pavel's pride would make him careless again, and this time Walter would be ready to ensure that the truth became undeniable. Pavel arrived with his usual swagger, oblivious to the subtle tension surrounding him. He laughed at jokes, leaned close to Amelia, and whispered in Russian to a friend accompanying him. Walter observed quietly from across the room, his calm presence contrasting sharply with Pavel's overconfidence. Every gesture, every word was catalogued. Walter's patience had transformed into a weapon far sharper than any raised voice or confrontation. Amelia moved among her friends, blissfully unaware of her father's careful orchestration. Walter could see the shadows of doubt lingering in her eyes, the small moments where she hesitated before smiling at Pavel. Her confusion had shifted to suspicion, a natural reaction to the inconsistencies her father had exposed. Walter's role was now to solidify those doubts, to make Pavel's deception undeniable to everyone present. As dinner progressed, Pavel again let his arrogance slip. He spoke in Russian, certain that no one outside his small circle understood him. He criticized the food, joked about Walter's quiet demeanor, and whispered comments meant to belittle the family. Walter listened, each word reinforcing the plan he had quietly built over the past weeks. Finally, Walter spoke, his voice calm but commanding. In perfect Russian, he addressed every insult Pavel had thrown. Every word meant to demean him. «Ты думал, что никто не слышит, но теперь все известно», he said. «You thought no one could hear, but now everything is known». The room froze. Pavel's face went pale, his words catching in his throat. Even the friends he had brought with him exchanged confused glances, realizing for the first time that Walter had understood every nuance, every hidden insult. The arrogance that had carried him for so long began to crumble visibly. Amelia's eyes widened, and she turned to her father. "Dad, you knew all along?" she whispered. Walter nodded slightly, his expression calm, almost serene. The clarity of the truth struck her fully, the weight of deception finally lifting from her shoulders. She could see Pavel as he truly was, a man blinded by his own pride and arrogance. Pavel tried to recover, his hands gesturing nervously, He attempted to explain, to spin the situation, but the room was no longer silent. Walter's words had pierced through, and now the witnesses, family members, friends, could see the truth plainly. Every sarcastic remark, every hidden criticism, every belittling gesture was laid bare. The extended family watched in stunned silence as Pavel faltered. The man who had believed himself untouchable was now cornered, his facade crumbling under the weight of evidence and observation. Walter remained calm, a pillar of quiet authority, while Pavel's panic became increasingly apparent. Amelia finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with the righteous indignation of betrayal. "Pavel, how could you speak to my father that way? How could you think we wouldn't understand?" Her words carried the weight of clarity, the undeniable truth of deception revealed. Pavel stammered, his usual confidence gone. Walter observed silently, letting the humiliation and exposure unfold naturally. He had planned this confrontation with precision, allowing the arrogance to self-destruct, creating a moment of undeniable clarity. By the end of the evening, the consequences were clear. Pavel's standing had been dismantled, his arrogance stripped away in front of witnesses who now understood the truth. Amelia's trust in her father had strengthened exponentially, while Pavel faced the stark reality of his own hubris. Walter felt a quiet satisfaction. The confrontation had been executed flawlessly, with patience, intelligence, and strategic observation. The man who thought himself superior had been humbled without Walter ever raising his voice or losing control. The calm, calculated father had triumphed where arrogance and pride had failed. As the family dispersed for the evening, Walter and Amelia shared a quiet moment alone. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, her eyes shining with trust and relief. Walter smiled faintly, the satisfaction of justice and protection radiating quietly from him. Pavel's lesson had been delivered not with anger, but with precision, patience, and undeniable truth. And Walter knew, in the deepest sense, that his daughter had learned as well. Integrity, intelligence, and composure are far stronger than arrogance and deception. The stage was set for the final resolution, where the ultimate fallout from Pavel's arrogance would become clear, and Walter's quiet victory would be fully realized. The next morning, the house felt lighter, almost as if the tension from the previous days had lifted. Walter moved calmly through the kitchen, making breakfast with a quiet determination. The confrontation had left Pavel shaken, humbled, and unsure of his footing. Every sarcastic remark, every whispered insult in Russian, had been catalogued and exposed. Walter's patience had turned into victory. Amelia entered the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a messy braid, her eyes clear and focused. She approached her father, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Dad, I can't thank you enough," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't seen through him." Walter smiled gently, a quiet pride in his calm demeanor. He knew that this moment, like all the others, was about more than exposing Pavel. It was about teaching Amelia the power of patience, intelligence, and observation, the true weapons against arrogance and deceit. Pavel, sensing the energy shift, tried to regain control. He attempted a few weak smiles, a few awkward gestures meant to charm, but the room now held no space for pretense. Walter's calm authority, combined with the undeniable exposure of Pavel's behavior, left no room for manipulation. Every attempt he made to assert dominance fell flat, and every word he spoke was met with quiet skepticism. Finally, Walter decided it was time for closure. He approached Pavel calmly, his expression firm but composed. In Russian he spoke, ensuring that every word carried the weight of truth. «Ты думал, что можешь нас обмануть, но теперь все стало ясно», he said. "You thought you could deceive us, but now everything is clear." Pavel's face went pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to find words that could repair the damage done. His arrogance had led him to believe he could humiliate Walter with impunity. but every carefully plotted insult had been dismantled with precision. The man who had once seemed untouchable now stood exposed. Humbled and defeated, Amelia stepped forward, her eyes locking on Pavel's. "I trusted you," she said, her voice steady but filled with righteous anger. "And you chose to mock my father instead of respecting him or me. That choice has consequences." The words landed with undeniable clarity, leaving Pavel speechless. Walter watched quietly, satisfied. His plan had worked flawlessly. No yelling, no theatrics, just patience, intelligence, and unwavering calm. Pavel's own arrogance had created his downfall. Every hidden insult, every sneering comment, every attempt to humiliate had now been revealed to everyone who mattered. As the day went on, the repercussions became clear. Pavel's confidence was shattered, his presence in Amelia's life questioned, and his credibility with friends and family irreparably damaged. Walter's strategy had achieved its ultimate goal: justice and protection for his daughter without unnecessary conflict. Amelia turned to her father again, a small, grateful smile forming on her lips. "Dad, you didn't just protect me from him. You taught me something important. How to see people clearly and stand strong." Walter nodded, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "That's right, Amelia. Strength doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from patience, observation, and knowing when to act." As Pavel quietly exited the house, the weight of defeat evident in every step, Walter and Amelia shared a moment of quiet victory. The storm had passed, arrogance had been humbled, and truth had been revealed in full. The father-daughter bond, tested but unbroken, had emerged stronger than ever. Before the day ended, Walter addressed the camera, speaking directly to the audience. "Sometimes the people we trust most reveal their true colors in the most unexpected ways. But patience, calm, and clear thinking can protect those we love and bring justice without unnecessary anger. If you've ever faced betrayal or deceit in your life, you know exactly how powerful these moments can be." He paused, letting the weight of the message settle, then continued. "Have you ever had to confront someone who thought they could humiliate you or someone you love? How did you handle it?" The camera lingered on Walter's calm, confident expression, a subtle, satisfied smile hinting at the quiet triumph he had achieved. Amelia joined him in the frame, her own smile a reflection of trust, love, and newfound clarity. Together, they embodied the message of the story. Patience and intelligence can overcome arrogance and deceit. The story concluded, leaving viewers with a lasting impression of justice, strategy, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. The conflict had been resolved, the antagonist humbled, and the emotional journey completed, ensuring maximum engagement and emotional resonance for the audience. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to Mind Sweet Revenge, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments. To watch the next revenge-filled story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.